that was a joke. They could do it much more quickly than that. But like, putting aside the merits of it for a second, pretty much all Ukrainians think that there was a double betrayal there, where if they had kept their nuclear weapons, Russia never would have invaded. And, as you say, that in exchange for that, we didn't give them anything, which was going to end up protecting their territory. And they're quite disappointed in us. I mean, it's a minor thing, but they're disappointed that we don't bring up the Budapest Memorandum more often than we do. I mean, it's a little bit cynical and disheartening for, when Americans say, well, NATO is real, when we said security assurances, we didn't mean anything at all. That's a little disheartening for people and for Ukrainians. But the reason why it's hard to go back to that history is because there's now such a strong, it's one of the many things that Ukrainians suppress when they talk to us in general, but it's such a strong view that if they had been able to keep those nuclear weapons, none of this would have happened. And in a country where, at this point, I think it's almost literally true to say everybody has lost someone. The idea that this war could have been deterred in its entirety is so attractive. I want to make another point about the history of the last 30 years, and maybe close on it. In the last 20 of those 30 years have been internationally a period of the decline of democracy around the world. And it's been a period not just of the quantitative decline of the number of democracies, but the democracies we do have are generally worse democracies than they were 20 years ago, including this country. That's the overall trend. And one of the reasons why Ukraine is so important and worthy of our attention is that it's a rare example. There are a handful of others, but it's a rare example of a country where, in the last 20 years, things have generally gotten better. They've been bucking the trend. Since the 1990s, since the Kuchma administration, with many fits and starts and with some very awkward moments, but in general, the story in Ukraine has been civil society moving the state towards less oligarchy and more rule of law. And that's a trajectory which is very valuable, right? And I didn't mention this in this talk, but one of the things we lose if we lose Ukraine is a huge amount of morale. Because one wants to think that we could have countries that get more democratic, and that could work. And there are precious few of them around right now. Precious few countries are getting more democratic. And if the one big European country, which was moving in that direction, gets invaded, destroyed, or moved from the map, that's not just going to be a loss in all the other ways that I talked about. It's also a terrible loss of morale. For people who think that democracy is good, but also people who think that it's worth taking a small risk for democracy. Because of the people who take a big risk for it, and the opinion, if the Ukrainian opinion polls say, what are you fighting for? Number one is borders, and usually borders. And then number two, or in there up towards the top, is a democratic way. So that is in fact what they're fighting for. And if you let people who are taking big risks for democracy go, you let them die, you let them be horribly wounded, you give up on them. If you let that happen, then who's going to take small risks for democracy? And if nobody's going to take small risks for democracy, democracy is going to have a really hard time in the next 20 years.
Professor Schneider, thank you very much for your thought-provoking
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Please join us for drinks. Maybe we need drinks after.
Direct front. Torpedoes to port.